Hi everyone, Joe Kral, President of the Society of St. Sebastian, and again, welcome to Pro-Life University. Again, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, be sure to do so below. Always give us a big thumbs up. We always appreciate and welcome you liking our videos. And obviously, if you ever have any comments or questions, be sure to write something down below, and I'll be glad to get back with you. Today's topic, what we're going to talk about today, are the rape and incest exceptions that we sometimes see from every now and then on legislative initiatives. We're going to talk about how these exceptions are actually unjust from a scientific standpoint and from a philosophical standpoint as well, and really kind of show the hypocrisy of some legislators who try to call themselves pro-life but hold these exceptions. That's just simply not the case. But one of the big reasons why I'm talking about this particular topic today is because of something that's happened in South Carolina. Those of you that follow pro-life legislation may already be aware of this. But earlier just within the last month or so, a subcommittee in the South Carolina Senate passed the fetal heartbeat bill. And when it came out of that subcommittee, it was what we would call a clean bill. Basically, it didn't have any rape or incest exceptions or weakening amendments or anything of that sort. When it went to full committee and then it was voted upon, it was then amended, and it came out with those rape and incest exceptions. Now, interestingly enough, as I mentioned just a moment ago, from time to time, we who follow pro-life legislation, pro-life lobbyists that have to lobby pro-life legislation, will see this sort of thing happen. It's not uncommon. I've certainly seen it as a pro-life lobbyist myself. Way back when I've had to lobby pro-life bills, it's not uncommon to see it with parental involvement laws such as parental notification. Parental consent basically is the idea is if the girl's been raped, then she shouldn't have to notify her mom and dad. Well, that's kind of an absurd notion. Why wouldn't you want to notify her mom and dad if she's been raped? Or in cases of informed consent legislation as well. Well, the idea again that the woman shouldn't receive full information about the risks of abortion, alternatives that are available to her, and so forth, if somehow she's been a victim of rape or incest. Again, why wouldn't you want to show this to her? But from time to time, this type of thing does pop up, and it's certainly something that needs to be addressed. Now, let's talk about why this sort of thing is not a good thing, why it's a bad thing. And again, let's go back to a little bit of what I said last week about the human person. Let's cover and let's talk about the idea of the human person, at least from a scientific point of view. Now, interestingly enough, let me just start with this. A recent study had come out that showed that the vast, and I mean the vast majority of biologists believe and claim and hold to the truth that life begins at conception. It's just a simple truth for them. You've got an individual organism that's organized, it's developing in a certain way, it metabolizes in a certain way, and so forth. It certainly meets the definition of life in their standards. And so, and again, it's common in textbooks to talk about how life begins at conception. Why? Because you have a unique and new, complete, if you will, with its genetic code, new individual of the species Homo sapiens. So again, from a scientific point of view, we know that we have a new human being, a new human life. And so we have to recognize that. It doesn't matter if that child is conceived in an act of love or even in an act of violence. The simple fact remains that you still have a unique human individual. If you were to ask a biologist and you were to show him a picture of a child that was conceived in an act of love and then another child who was conceived in an act of violence and ask him, well, which one was conceived in the act of violence, he wouldn't be able to tell you. There's no genetic markers, if you will, that says this human being is somehow different from this human being because they're a product of, if you will, an act of violence. It just simply doesn't work that way. And so that's why, for example, we see a lot of people that will come up and they show the absurdities by, showing pictures of, two embryos, one that was conceived maybe in violence and another one that was not. it shows the absurdity of it. Nonetheless, they are still scientifically human. Now, if we look at it metaphysically as well, and again, if we go back to last week's topic, we can talk about the Christian philosopher Boethius, who defined person as an individual substance of a rational nature. And again, one of the things that we talked about is this idea of rational nature. Rational nature doesn't mean that you're actualizing your intellect and your reasoning abilities right here and now. So Boethius would certainly say, for example, that the human being who's in deep sleep or even in a coma is still a individual substance of a rational nature, because his nature is what's important. Man is a rational animal. He has the ability to reason. He doesn't always use it. Right? And so even Boethius would simply say, yes, a newborn infant is indeed an individual substance of a rational nature, even though he's not able to think and rationalize like adults are. And again, we just carry this logic all the way to the point of conception, where you have the single stage zygote, if you will. Again, it's an individual substance of a rational nature. It may not be able to actualize that ability to think just yet, but nonetheless, its nature qualifies it as a person. And so here, if we take the scientific evidence, if we take the metaphysical logic that we're giving, we can come and conclude that indeed, that even the single stage embryo, the human zygote, is indeed a human person and deserves protection. And like I said, it's kind of be able to, it's really absurd, because the simple fact is it doesn't matter how the embryo or how this embryonic child was conceived. The simple fact remains that you still have a human being that has, the ability, or will have the ability to think. It may not be now, it may be at a later date, but it's still an individual being with a rational nature. So that's sort of the big important thing to think about with respect to that here. One of the things that we also need to understand is that even this child deserves rights. And it doesn't matter if, it doesn't matter if it's a child that is comes about because of an act of love or of an act of violence. The simple fact is, since it's a human being, it deserves rights. Period. And one of the things that we fundamentally need to know is that this involves all of us in many ways. There are certain moral duties that we have with respect to other human beings, since we're able to think, since we're able to understand objective truth and so forth. The simple truth of the matter is that from our moral duties, rights come about. So when we talk about the right to life, for example, we have the duty not to kill innocent human life. And from that duty comes the right. Hence we say, we have a right to life. And same with this child. None of these children that are conceived in acts of incest or rape have done anything wrong. They've done nothing wrong to warrant such a harsh punishment because of the circumstances of their conception. And so we need to fundamentally understand that when it comes to a right, that even this child that may have been conceived in an act of violence still deserves the right to life, because fundamentally, from a philosophical perspective, from a scientific perspective, it's still a human being. And at that, it's still an innocent human being. That's fundamentally important to understand here. When we talk about this sort of thing, I think sometimes legislators get a little confused, unfortunately, when it comes to this sort of subject. Sometimes they try to make up excuses, if you will, like, well, she's, this is a tragic circumstance and she shouldn't have to carry this child. Well, the simple fact of the matter is one act of violence doesn't justify another act of violence, if you will. Again, it's like the old adage that we hear from our moms: two wrongs don't make a right. And in many cases, by encouraging women to get an abortion that are victims of incest or rape, we're not helping them heal, if you will. Basically, by urging them to do something that is completely vicious and malicious on top of it, we're causing more harm to their psyche, to their soul, to so much more. And so I think it's very important to understand that in many ways that these children, even though they may have been conceived in an act of violence, can serve as a process of healing, if you will, especially to understand and to appreciate the human dignity that's going on here. One of the things that we need to understand is that every conception is a gift, and it's really meant to be a gift to the mother, obviously, to all of humanity, and so forth. We are to appreciate and cherish life. And I really want to thank several folks that are out there that go to various legislators and to various legislative hearings and speak publicly on this issue. So folks like Rebecca Kessling from Save the One, Heather Hobbs from Save the One, you got Jennifer Christie that's out there with Love Louder. Each of these women in their own way has had to deal with this particular subject by either being a child that was conceived in an act of violence or having been raped herself and basically giving birth to a child that was, conceived through rape. But they go out and they show the dignity of these children and the dignity of the women that bear these children as well, and how that this is a good thing, really. And in many ways, I think they serve as an example for those legislators out there that kind of have trouble with understanding this. And I think this is sort of an interesting point. And I certainly urge all of you to, if you have an elected official that's representing you that holds these exceptions, to go and talk to them, let them know, look, this is a human life. This human life deserves protection, regardless of the circumstances of how the child was conceived. And it's your job as a legislator to help ensure that he receives that needed protection. We have the duty to protect this child. And so I really strongly urge folks to go out and talk to legislators, talk to friends that might hold these exceptions and so forth, and really kind of talk about the absurdities of it, if you will. Let them know, that scientifically there is no difference. It's not as if the child who's conceived in an act of rape is somehow going to be a monster or anything like that. It's a human being, right? It's an innocent human being. This child did not commit the crime. This child, in many ways, is also a victim of this crime. And so we need to recognize that sort of thing. I think it's vitally important. It's properly what's due to both the mother and the child. And again, this gets into the whole classic idea of justice. When we talk about justice, that which is due to the other, right? We owe to the mother and the child compassion and help and protection. We got to understand that this child did not commit the crime. This child has done nothing wrong. This child is genetically human and metaphysically is a person, and so deserves protections as such. So I strongly urge folks out there, always do your best to try to better educate people on this sort of topic. And, if you hear about legislators or even your legislator that is holding the exceptions and pushing for exceptions, really go out and really try to talk to that legislator and show them why that position is wrong. Well, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much again for stopping by for, another class of Pro-Life University. We always enjoy it. And again, I hope you have a blessed weekend, and God bless.